There have been several high-profile cases in the news lately of teenage victims of homophobic bullying killing themselves. These recent tragic cases have highlighted an issue that is still all too common. Researcher Rebecca Haskell and SFU criminology professor Brian Burtch have just written a book on the topic, Get That Freak, Homophobia and Transphobia in High Schools. And they join me now in the studio to talk more about this very important issue. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, Rebecca, you primarily conducted the research for this book, and you interviewed 16 different students about their experiences. So generally, I mean, obviously you can't detail all of them, but generally, is it a positive or negative one in high schools today?
I think it's both, actually. And the youth that I spoke with talked to how they experience homophobia every day, but they had more positive experiences, so they were supported by teachers, and that really mitigated the impacts of the homophobia.
Okay. Now, I tend to think that things have changed, that it's not the same as it was 50 years ago or 30 years ago. Have things changed? Are we more progressive and more accepting?
In some places, yes, and in some contexts, yes. I don't know, Brian, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think what's changed a lot, of course, has been a liberalization in terms of our attitudes and legislation as affecting queer people in Canada. And at the same time, I think a lot of things are going to depend place by place, whether you live in a certain region, whether you're in a certain school. Some schools are very, very gay positive, for example, and there's good initiatives coming from the students themselves with support from allies such as teachers and parents, and other schools not so much. So I think we have come quite a long way, certainly on paper and the spirit of things, but there's ongoing changes. As you may recall, at one time, say a gay couple wouldn't claim benefits. They couldn't have medical, dental benefits. And a book came out fairly recently called The War Against Queers about the dismissal of civil servants and people in the military. So a lot of things have changed and a lot of things haven't changed.
I think one thing that I got from your book was detailing the experiences. A lot of people said they didn't have violent experiences or they were not victims of extreme bullying, but it's the language, the everyday language that still is used in high school that can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, it can have a lot of damage, and the youth spoke to that. They talked about having them being called names directly, or even less direct forms of homophobia, so saying things like that's okay, and that the impact that that can have on young people.
People are still saying that, aren't they?
They are still saying it. It's a very common phrase, and it's really common in our vocabulary now, and we don't even think and make that connection between gay people and phrases like that. So once people realize that connection, they're less likely to use that language because they know it can have an impact on young people.
Now, your book is very timely. I mean, there have been several very tragic incidents in the news lately. And obviously that's coincidental. Your book you've been working on this a long time previously.
Right, and I actually think that, I don't think that there actually is a rise in suicide rates right now. I think this has been happening for a long time. We know that lesbian, gay, bisexual youth are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than heterosexual youth. But right now it just seems that people are listening and people are paying attention and finding ways to push back and support queer youth.
So what are some of the things we should be doing in schools now?
You can carry that.
Okay, so we can have anti-homophobia policies. So policies that are against bullying, we need to name homophobia and say, you know, that's not acceptable in schools. Teachers can intervene when they hear homophobic things, and that sends the message to youth that, you know, we do support you and you deserve to be here. And people can check their own language and make sure that they're not using homophobic language as well.
Is there anything you could add to that?
Well, I think the importance of students themselves having a say here and speaking up, but they have to feel safe about it. And I think the point about safe spaces is important. And there's no magic wand here where this will work in this school or that school. But it really has to come out from that. And I think also outside of the school, there are now so many online resources, there's so many community resources, especially in Vancouver, for example, and the larger cities, that people can also draw on those. So it doesn't have to be entirely within the school itself. But good leadership and awareness that this is not just some minor problem in schools, but that it's fairly endemic. I think that's really important.
So who are you hoping will read this book?
Well, I think for one thing, we want people who are really passionate about this to have a look at the book. The middle of the book includes several excerpts from the research that Becky undertook, so you'll actually catch the voices of people who are doing this. It also is based out of some academic research, so for people who are interested in new ideas, new thoughts about gender variance and sexuality and tolerance, there's certainly some material in there as well. It's primarily, I would say, for 16 and up, maybe. Would you agree with that? 16 years and up. And we also would like to be part of a wider conversation.
Well, that conversation is very important, and thank you so much to both of you for coming in today and having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll check in with meteorologist Christy Gordon after a break on the new news. Stay with us.